API Resilience Podcast. It's our belief that APIs are central in the changing business landscape that has been named digital transformation, and that digital transformation through APIs offers the opportunity for a dramatic shift in how companies can work together and participate in creating value. We've invited guests from many different types of organizations and asked them to share insights from their journeys and their API programs, as well as the challenges, objectives, and approaches as they endeavor to make their companies and communities more resilient.
The real leadership comes when you see a blocker and you say, look, I can break through that because there's a gap. I see it and I have to step up to meet that gap. That's, I think, where these programs are successful. If you know the material and you've gone through the journey yourself, you're able to have empathy with that person and then teach them in a way that you kind of wish you were taught, or you understand how to ingest that information. If you have a portal like that and you're going to go out and you're going to try to get adoption, there's a grit aspect to this. You got to own it and you got to continue to engage with your audience.
Welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. For today's episode, we've got Raymond Peng, who works as a cloud value advisor at Google, and he'll explain a little bit more about what that means exactly, because I know that it covers a lot of flags.
Well, actually, at Google, you're allowed to make up your titles. Our official, there's two types of titles. Our official is cloud value advisor. And what I do specifically is I focus on API strategy. API programs with our customers. So helping different customers kickstart, accelerate, or scale up their business using APIs.
So a lot of the stuff I do in API world is also about thinking about ecosystems. And we're thinking about how can we drive, we call this our continuous engagement model. There's a new engagement model that we're going to start piloting, which is basically we build an initial portal, but then we work with you to help figure out like how are you going to actually make this dev portal successful with people in UX and doing actual research and
probably some marketers, you know?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
You have to think about the typical persona of API people you meet are developers, architects.
Yes.
Right? Maybe project managers, scrum masters, etc.
Yes.
Basically people in software development world. But most times, if it's a big company, it's IT software development, or enterprise software development, which typically for 20 or 30 years of behavioral training is give me the requirements and I'll build it.
Exactly.
It's almost like you're hiring a professional, but the professional does the work, but it's on you to figure out how to make it, successful, right? And so now you say, hey, developer, you own these things, or it's now your program. For the first time, like, hey, no one's going to promote this but me. So very often you can see like developers will be very good at building features, building the portal, getting it structurally sound. But then the promotion part is something that's a skill that they don't have, or a skill that they're not used to, dealing with, because they haven't had to, focus on that aspect, because the business will provide the requirements, and whether the software is being used or not is not my concern. I built it. That's right. They were done. I'm on to the next thing. And now like, I'm not on to the next thing. That's mine. How do I promote that? So I think that's a critical part of
exactly.
In some companies who do it well, really put themselves out there, like I had a team, they were very successful. Like their first MVP was a good API product, but more so than anything, they at the launch, they went to their company like an auditorium, and they invited everybody from IT and they invited business, and only half of the crowd showed up, but it was still like over 100 people. Yeah. So that, they really cast a net, and they filmed it. They had T-shirts, they had swag, like they basically did a developer mini conference in their company, and so then people knew about it, and there was all this buzz about it, and they got people to join their roundtables, and they had a UX designer on the team. But also, I think it was just like the confidence and the willingness to, or the drive to like get out there. Like, you have to, you can't have all your fuel on building, the best product. You have to leave like a quarter tank full to promote it. And that's the part that I think oftentimes will run out of fuel, at the end.
Or it's not their key strength. This is almost social engineering that you're doing. You're building ecosystems actually of people. I heard a lot of these stories in the inner sourcing community, where they're basically to get people to start sharing code. So because like you got this large organization and like every single silo is doing their own thing, and they're not really, nobody knows what the others are doing. So basically different groups are reinventing the same thing over and over again. And like one of the most successful strategies was just start organizing meetups. And it doesn't have to even be about the topic that you want to organize. It's just change the social structure of your organization so that there's now a different communication and a different culture and a different ecosystem that is growing. And then that kind of kickstarts it. Like Koen Adolf told the story about how they did it in ABN AMRO. And basically they've been throwing like these big parties, also like just as you described it.
Yeah.
We're going to do this. This is going to be awesome. And
you really have to kind of put yourself out there. Make a plan. I remember I was sitting down with them and we made like a plan. We said, as much as when you design a dev portal, you're thinking about the audience. So we sat down and said, like, okay, who are we speaking to? If you're making a marketing plan, like in the company, what are the different audiences? There's, developers, engineers, there's IT managers, there's line of business folks in operations, and there's business leaders. So they're all going to interpret it differently. But then we also need to message it differently too, and maybe the events should be different that we host, to talk about what the API program is, because there's different levels of information people care to know. So, I mean, if you kind of think about that, it's like it's as important to design a portal as it is important to design a communication plan, a marketing plan, and also interestingly, they had a couple of guys on the team who are, I think, a little more better, well-spoken. One, they were better, well-spoken. They really kind of liked the stage, and they were technical enough, so they were great at being developer evangelists and training. So they could kind of like bring developers on and do training after training, and like really kind of be like the face of the program to some of these different groups, which is like it's a team sport. You can't just have one person be the face to everything. You have to have people in your program that can speak to different audiences and resonate well with it. So, and there's a lot of complexity, right, when you're trying to build a bigger program like that, to have the right people in those positions to be able to promote, to those audiences. It's not, how you got to build that diversity in your team, and not just have all the same type of folks.
Yeah. It was interesting what you said, being able to speak to different audiences. How do you see this in the organizations that you're talking with? The level of transformation that's necessary to really make it work. Like I see now more customers coming to us asking about like a sort of internal developer platform. They're trying to restructure their business or their IT landscape so that they'll have a platform that other people can then build stuff on top of. But that requires a lot of you need the C-level to be involved in this. How hard is this? Do you think, or how hard do you see this? Do most organizations you end up talking with, are they already there, or is there still work to do to get there?
Absolutely, there's work to do. I mean, the ones who are successful, it's taken them many years. I think there's a lot of different factors in it for stuff, but what I notice is it all comes down to, I think the key differentiator in all this is probably leadership and probably some timing. And timing is more a luck thing, right? Is the organization ready to make that? Do you have an executive team who see the problem and are willing to sponsor it? But in the end, you have to have somebody who's going to willing to stand up and say, look, I'm going to lead this. I'm going to make the case, run the execution. Because too often times, I think at a lot of big companies, there's the strategy and architecture group, and then there's the group who does the execution. And so there's nobody who's actually going to take ownership of it. They're just doing their jobs, right? And to do something as transformative as like a developing platform, something that doesn't exist, nobody's going to give you that job.
Yeah.
You have to earn that job. I think it's the key. A lot of times, we meet customers, say, hey, do you have an API program? Do you have something internal? I say, no. There's no funding for it. And most people will kind of think, oh, well, that's a barrier. That's a blocker, right?
Yeah.
When there's a job opening, I'm going to apply for it, and then I'll take the job. But the real leadership comes when you see a blocker and you say, look, I can break through that because there's a gap. I see it, and I have to step up to meet that gap and to solve it. That's, I think, where these programs are successful. There's an opening, they take it, and they're able to run with it, and they're able to execute it and stay with it. And they have the right, talent to be able to drive that. And that makes a big difference in these programs.
It almost feels like you need internal entrepreneurs to run the API program.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell, we can tell when we meet our customer prospects. There's people who are very passionate about it, and there's those who are just, doing their job. You can tell the difference.
The other thing I've been thinking is that these people that we're talking with now that are running the API program, how will they advance in their careers? Because I think this is such a crucial aspect of organizations today. Basically, we're rebuilding the information backbone for an organization.
Yeah.
And exactly because you need these social skills to get everybody in the organization excited about it, plus the technical skills to understand what you're doing, plus the insights and the architectural skills to design something that's going to work.
Yeah.
I wonder if these the next decade's CIOs and CTOs at least, or maybe even CEOs, or how do you see that?
So it could be. I mean, think about the .com era with e-commerce. I think this internet thing is good. We should get an online store. People that stood up and channeled those online stores are now heads of digital business, or they're heads of commercial business.
Yes,
right. It's a totally new line of revenue. And I don't think it's just the CIO. I think it's people who really have an opportunity to lead the company into a new era, right? Into a new way of doing business. And so, the folks who are, I think, truly leaders, that means they can, the real differentiator is you spot an opportunity, you capitalize on it, and you can rally people around you, and you can get it executed. I mean, that's a trait that transcends a department. That's a trait of leadership that will work regardless of what industry, what department you're coming from. And I think that's where we are. That's why I think timing is really important too. Timing, the API economy is sort of almost reinvented itself over the last 5 years. And more companies are thinking the intersection of cloud and digital means IT means APIs, and IT has to change differently. And so this is a good time for people who want to step up and take on that leadership role, and that will lead to a seat at the table at the management committee. Like I said, the company that I work with, who's very engaged, I mean, they have a monthly with the CEO, to give an update. It's making a difference. That's not just a small project anymore. That's like a company investment that's been made, a strategic investment in people, in technology, in process, and it's more so in people. It's more so they're making much more investment in people than they're making in technology. Because I think they realize that it's the people that make the technology successful. It's not like going back to a developer marketing. It's not the technology that holds the promise. It's the people that use the technology, and so you have to invest in those people.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But I really wanted to talk about a couple of things that you specifically know a lot about, because we share several interests. We've been working together on a webinar in the past, materials around the UX of developer portals and how those impact API strategy. So I think that would be a really interesting topic to dig a little bit deeper into. It's like how do developer portals and the UX of developer portals help with making APIs accessible both to hardcore developers and citizen developers. And I know that's one of your passions also. So we'd love to hear.
I love that topic. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could talk about it all day long. In fact, I do. So I'm tired of it. It's been like so many years of doing this and talking to different customers. I think what's also really interesting is that just a lot of businesses are at different levels of maturity. You've got companies who think about APIs as very like old school point-to-point integrations of their systems. And you have companies who really kind of see this as a game changer for their business. And that's a very wide, spectrum of everything in between from that. So, there's a lot of different entry points to talk about, how people are using developer portals and APIs and the different philosophies about them.
Actually, I think I've got an interesting angle. So I'm now thinking about one specific customer. It's a really large financial services customer. And they've started a developer portal program. It's very, very interesting, fascinating. They're an Apigee customer. So they've got Apigee as part of their organization. And they've started a developer portal program where they're going to have more than one developer portal for different local markets. I'm a little bit afraid when I'm talking with them. They're awesome people. You have these people that you're like, oh, I really want to help them be successful. Like, I want to help them get promoted because they're so awesome. Yeah. But it feels a little bit like they're stuck in the technology trap. Like this happens a lot in IT. In corporate IT, there's a group in IT that has been tasked to get a certain technology implemented. They're doing that, but now they're waiting for people to come and ask them to use that technology. So they've got this developer portal program. They have a couple of customers that have developer portal, but it's like the real success is still kind of out.
Oh, I see. So they kind of
what would you do?
Portal platform, and they're hoping that other people will take and make instances of this developer portal in different geographies or local markets.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, they've been tasked. They're aware of as an organization, they're aware of the importance of developer experience and developer portals. They've made the strategic investments to make this program. That's all there. They can spin up new portals, but it's not the top priority on people's lists because there's all this other stuff that they need to do. So I've been advising them to do a bright spots and FOMO strategy, which is basically pick one customer, make them so successful, then promote the hell out of them so that everybody gets jealous and wants to be that customer. But I wonder I think you see this all the time, I imagine, because you're advising large corporates on how to become successful at APIs, and which is a very similar problem, I think.
That's the challenge, like innovation, isn't it?
Yes.
Innovation happens in different pockets. Like it's not like everybody all of a sudden has the same idea all over the company, right? I mean, very rarely will that happen. So it's usually one group that kind of figures it out. They have a need, they see a need, or they're just trying to solve it, and then they try to get others to believe in that or to get onboarded. And it's not just developer portals in the API space. It's also just the fact of using APIs, or managing APIs, that whole thing, like you said, the bright spot and creating this fear of missing out becomes a challenge. And, we were talking about this some other time too, is like IT or developers oftentimes don't have to promote their own stuff. Like historically, business said, build it, IT makes it. And then it's like, hey, good luck, business. Well,
I did it. I've done my job.
I've done it. Like, if it works or doesn't, that's on you because I built it. You told me what you needed, and I'm done. So now it's up to you, business. And I think IT and developers are not used to necessarily taking full ownership of the, end to end, as they are now doing with the fact that they have to own the developer experience. And the usage of APIs. So there's a lot of different things I've seen around adoption and ways to go about it. This particular customer of yours, I'm guessing, you really kind of have to think about this. I think sometimes, I wouldn't say it's too late, but you always kind of have to go back to, why did you start it in the first place? Like, what was the impetus of the need? and hopefully that was for a good reason. Hopefully it wasn't just for technology's sake and a single use case, but hopefully it was for a larger set of use cases. And that larger set of use cases means that there's some sort of demand or use, like, if you're maybe groups or teams or different departments are looking for a particular API. And that's, I think, the first lesson learned, I guess, Kristof, and we've talked about it in other places, is this outside-in thinking. Like, I'm not going to build the technology. I'm going to think about the use cases and what people are looking for and what the problems that they want us to be solved. So then I can attach a technology enabler to that. And hopefully do you know if that's how it started? Was it an outside-in thinking, or was it let's replace this appliance because it's older and we need something better from a technical standpoint?
I'm not 100% sure. It's like once you get to a certain scale, there's a lot of politics involved. There is this need to rationalize IT expenditure. I think often this is when IT comes in and starts taking over projects. Like, there's probably some other teams that are already doing APIs and have some developer portals, but they're trying to like make this better and create an internal capability to accelerate all of this. And I think this is very much this is the transition from doing APIs as projects to doing APIs as products to doing an API program. And I think it's that transition from doing API products and having some successes already out there to doing a full-blown API program, and not just doing APIs at scale, but in this case, doing developer portals at scale and enabling not just one team, but enabling a whole series of teams that might have very differing needs. This is the other thing. It's very much connected to this story, because we call this a MicroDev Portal story, or a micro portal story, where a customer is so large that, yes, they need a central portal, but they also need micro portals, because they're never going to get everybody to agree on how all these individual places need to work. And they have so many different markets that they're active in that they can't force everybody to go through this one constraint. And there's like a balance that you have to make between flexibility and standardization to capture economies of scale, but then still be adaptive enough to actually create new value. Maybe rephrasing the question. So I think for organizations that are in this place, they're trying to switch from API as a product to actual full-blown API programs. They already have API management. They've chosen a really good one, Apogee. How do they do then the next step? I guess it still is looking for bright spots.
I think it's more than that. It reminds me of many years ago, I was working for the Coca Cola company, and this is not API related, but it's very much the same thing. It was around knowledge management. And so you think about APIs as data, as specific functionalities, as really valuable resources, right? And one of the most valuable resources in companies is knowledge, right? Institutional knowledge. So best practices, approach on doing this. And the Coca-Cola company, as you know, is like, are they really a beverage company, or are they probably the most famous marketing company in the world, right? Because it's not about the beverage. It's really about the feeling and the emotion that you take from having a Coke, right? And the presence of that brand being all over the world. And so Coke has invested a lot in the Coca-Cola way of marketing. So if you ever go there. And so the knowledge and the best practices are really, really important. And the person that I work with was the product owner of the Coca-Cola way of marketing, as well as the way to transfer and manage knowledge in the organization. And the most fascinating part, I think, it started with a vision, and it turned into an IT project, right, as well, because I was working with IT there, and we built out a whole portal, and a portal to showcase, different pieces, different types of content, different reusable assets. And you think it's very, very similar in the same case as APIs. Now, a lot of companies might have just been exhausted after the first release and said, oh, we got it done. Really what it came down to is someone took ownership of the content. Product owner that I work with, her name is Rachel. She was fantastic at basically getting people engaged, right? She figured out like why would people want to come to this knowledge management portal? Well, because they want to see themselves, because they want to network with other people. And so she made the portal about connecting with others. Social media. This was before social media was a thing, right? Because it was like mid 2000. And so if you think about like what happened, internal to a company, or it's like, hey, I want to network with someone. I know Kristof, you did a great campaign in Africa, and I know someone else who did a great campaign in Asia. Let's see if we can coordinate and learn from each other. Now, this is where, from a global perspective, like connecting people together makes a big difference. The other part of it was she took ownership of it. If you have a portal like that and you're going to go out and you're going to try to get adoption, there's a grit aspect to this. You got to own it, and you got to continue to engage with your audience. In markets like social media management or social media engagement, like you got to continue to promote. It's not just the bright spot, like I want to, because people forget, people forget about this stuff like very, very quickly, right? If people didn't forget, then there would be no need for advertising. There'd be no need for commercials, right? Because, Kristof, you probably like your tea a certain way. You probably like a certain type of food and type of brand, but, you forget, right? And so marketing, advertising has a need to like keep it top of mind. And so for most people, it's probably not that their initial use case for a developer portal was unfounded or there wasn't a need. It's that people forget. We have so many things requiring our attention, and someone needs to focus on the marketing and basically the advertising of this developer portal that's been made. And the really successful ones don't think about it as a campaign, right? Because marketing in itself is not a campaign. It is a whole continuous dialogue with your audience. Coca Cola wasn't just one great commercial. It was, man, everywhere I go, I've got the machines, I've got the materials, I've got the billboards, I've got the apps, I've got everything. And I got people wearing t-shirts. I've got little paraphernalia everywhere that says Coke on it. It's all these things that kind of create the experience. And so the teams that do it well figure out that there's first of all, there's multi-channels to communication. And multi-channels means like, workplace today, you have email, you have forums, you have different kind of town halls or conference meetings where people are present to share knowledge. Are you in on those? Do you have a 5-minute pitch, or do you have a 30-minute demo? Do you have a training session to invite people to engage deeper than just a 2-second ad spot? And so developers have to think like marketers. It's internal marketing, but an internal marketing is just as tricky as an external marketing, because you're buying for attention from things people need to know and things people want to know. And so that's the essence. I think that's why they did it so well with the developer portal, the knowledge management portal from many years ago when I worked at Coke, is that they took ownership of it. They thought about the different channels in which they would market internally, and they engaged the audience in things that they cared about, and then pulled them into the portal, right? People would come in and they started browsing and using it. And they always look at it from and business use this too, they look at it from a market to market. Oh, I'm focusing on this audience today. I'm going to focus on that audience tomorrow. And so, for example, it was like, oh, I'm going to focus in the North American marketers, and I want to focus on the Asia Pacific marketers, and I want to focus on the EMEA-based marketers. And so this way it gave them a focus to kind of divide and conquer how they could actually get to the different regions and get people to understand. Because at some level, you have to engage. If you're a global company, you have to engage in the things that they care about, right? One global message is not going to make sense at the cultural and the business context of that locale. And so for people who want to promote that developer portal or that piece of technology or that sort of mindset, you're probably looking at a series of campaigns, a series of bright spots, and adapt it. It's funny, you look at something as specific. I remember like we're talking about cookies, Oreo cookies, that commercial adapted in multiple different countries is completely different. The context is different. Of course, the language is different, but is it one with a family? Is it one a sports theme? Is it one with just a kid? And it's a different context because you want to connect with your audience in different ways. And so I think that's the trick with these things is if you are going to make a global platform, you really have to, or if you want to make an enterprise platform, you really have to connect with your audience in different ways. and those that kind of like have that grit to own it have been able to do that, I think, really well.
So basically, you almost need to have a developer advocate, like an internal developer advocate, to do this.
Yeah, and what is a developer advocate? It's like, I think that in the world there are different types of people, right? There's stuff like those who really are sort of like, they like to do their thing and be expert about it, but they're not big time promoters. And there's some who are more extroverted that love to engage with people and have chats about stuff. And it doesn't matter whether you're introvert or extrovert, it's just about the kind of energy that they try to go for. So I think that's exactly true. You look at the team, and sometimes I would look at customers when we engage and say, like, oh, who would be a good product owner and who would be a good developer advocate? Who would be like front and center when it comes time to train a bunch of developers? And are they passionate about it? Do they bring something to the table where they enjoy it? That's what we look for. Like what's that person with a spark and that ability to communicate and make it easy for people to understand and want to learn the technology.
Is this something that you can help? Like, say, if there's an existing team, is this something you can help them with, or is this something that has to come from the inside? The reason I'm asking, so we started looking. So we currently deliver developer portals, like I call it a rapid response model, which is we can get your portal by next month if you have to, like give or take a little bit of But often it's like, okay, urgently we need to get this thing out. And we're trying to switch, and this is okay, but I think for long-term success, you need other stuff. You don't just need a portal, you need someone who can, maybe an external product owner, or someone who can bring some change management experience from other places. Or do you think that works, or do you think it's better? I guess it's better if it's somebody who's already in the team. But if that's not the case.
Yeah. There's a philosophy around like growth mindset. I'm definitely of that philosophy.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is, we've all learned a lot in our lives, right? And I'm sure everybody that's listened, including yourself, I'm sure, anybody else has taught somebody something else in their life, right? Like we've all taught, whether it's like, hey, let me teach you how to tie a shoelace, or let me show you how to draw this interesting thing, or maybe solve a math problem in school, right? Everybody has taught somebody something, and they probably enjoyed it because they knew the material. If you know the material, you've gone through the journey yourself, you're able to have empathy with that person and then teach them in a way that you kind of wish you were taught, right? Or you wish that, or you understand how to learn and how to ingest that information. So I think that the art of teaching, of training, of enabling somebody else is inherent in all humans. It's really about understanding whether you have the right skill and knowledge. And so I find that the team that goes through the process themselves, so I had a team, it was also a financial service company, they spent a good half year to a year of the team developing their portal, developing their API program, building APIs for different aspects and use cases. And then after that, they kind of went through the hardship, let's say. And I wouldn't say it's a hardship, but they walked several miles, right, in the shoes of what others would do. And so then they turn around and say, okay, how can we teach this to other people? And from there, you don't need do you need a change management person to come in and tell you about, the different modes of understanding, communication, adoption? Sure, but you could also read a book about some of those things as well. Because in the heart of it, the core is, do you have the knowledge that you need to transfer to others? And do you know how do you have empathy to understand how people need to learn? And an outside, change management specialist may or may not have that empathy because they may or may not understand the corporate culture. And a lot of times, frankly, it's corporate culture that's going to dictate whether people are interested or not, or what those things that they're looking for, right? What gets rewarded in a company. So for example, like these guys at a bank, they focused on certification level 1, level 2, level 3. And at certain levels, you could put it on your corporate profile, you could put it on your resume. That became something of value. to the organization, to performance review. And so those things mattered. And they went all the way to architect level. So developers were like, oh, well, I get an architect certification if I take this training and learn this technology. And not only that, the technologies were new and different. They were going through more automation and more CI/CD, and different ways of using, right, that people weren't using today. And those things were valuable. So understanding what's valuable to the enterprise or corporation is really important. And then having people that have gone through the mile and are able to do it. We kind of think of, I bet you, Kristof, like, you're a natural teacher, right? You have to be, because to run a company, you cannot do it yourself. You have to enable other people to do it. If you give somebody some training and train the trainer of sorts, there's a big difference, right, between being able to say, hey, go off and train and give them nothing, to, hey, let me show you how to train somebody and then send them off. And I think that belief that anybody can do that, if we give them the right tools and the right mentorship and the right coaching, I think is important for, a lot of companies and managers to realize that, that they don't have to outsource, that stuff. They
For
can
sure.
they can't build with it for that kind of stuff.
I fully agree. Like I very much believe in growth and the ability to learn new things. Just like technologies are constraints that accelerate certain changes. So it feels like there's this co-creation happening. Like you need to change the culture and you need to start using a new technology. And you can't pick one end or the other end. You have to do both at the same time, else it's just going to fail. I guess there was this book I read about a systems way of change management. So it's not like, let's take the org chart and let's cut some branches or something like that. It's like the way they approached it was you change the groups of people that are communicating, and that will transform the organization. So they had like several things. Like one was the teams, like what kind of meetings did you enable to get people to talk with each other, and that changed everything. They had, how are you learning from the engagements that you're undergoing? And so they had a couple of these things that were very soft. There was nothing where people were being forced to do something. It was always permission-based interaction, where two willing parties interact with each other voluntarily.
Yeah.
But the space in which they interact was being reshaped, and that transformed how everything worked, because before they were not talking to each other. So it's that kind of way of working that I strongly believe in, is where rather than using the stick or the carrot, like not using stick or carrot, neither of them, because both are manipulative.
Yeah.
But trying to shape the space so that people actually find themselves where they need to go.
It's almost like good coaching, right?
Yes.
My manager, she's always asking me questions, and sometimes like I just want the answer, but she's like, well, then she asked me another question, and if you go through this series of questions, it's a subtle way of getting me to change my way of thinking, but just I'm internalizing it one step, right? And I think that's what you're saying, is that like people need to internalize it and come to that spot. You can't just, what they say, like you can't, you can bring a horse to water, but it can't drink. So you really have to figure out ways to not incentivize, but get people to, walk themselves to that spot through different methods.
Is that something that also holds up in API programs? Have you seen?
Like you said, I think it's subtle because, for example, when you were talking about Bright Spot, we definitely talk about showcase, right? Showcase.
Yes.
And that brings people to understand, the art of the possible. The other method that I think is similar to what you're talking about is what we used to call like digital workshops or API workshops. And so people are like, well, it's not really APIs we're talking about, because what we do is we engage different aspects of the business and IT together, and we talk about what sort of customer challenges they're trying to solve. And so we're not actually saying, hey, you need to use APIs and like, here's Apogee, here's our developer portal. What can we put up there, guys? It's what are some of the customer pain points and what are you trying to do with them? And let's walk through that customer journey. And where do you have friction? Oh, I can't get this data. Oh, it takes us, a long time. Oh, it would be great if the customer could make a change at this point in time that they can't do today. And in those moments is when we find that, hey, there's a fit. There's a fit and purpose, that their purpose is aligned to our purpose. And I think that's when there's a win-win, right? And so that's, I think, the subtle or the art of creating a connection with people on shared values.
It is when, and I had to learn this for a very long time in my life. I've been believing that I need to save people, that I need to like go in and help and rescue people. I dramatize it because it is much more subtle, but
some people probably need it.
but actually what I've learned now fairly recently is that no, because when you do that, when you step into the savior role, you're actually forcing the other person into a further dependence. And I think it's that's non-manipulative way of doing things. I think that's incredibly powerful, because then people full-heartedly join in, and rather than being pushed from either side, they can actually accept it.
Yeah.
But it's, how do you marry that with marketing? Maybe this is why, and to tie it back to UX, this is why UX is so powerful, because it's not really manipulating, it's removing friction. You are trying to make it as easy as possible for people to get what they need to do, and you let them find their own rewards for what they're doing and for interacting with you.
Yeah.
And how did you get started with UX actually? How did you get interested in it?
I started as a web designer. So my first, when I was in high school, I designed a club website. That was how I first got into it. And I shamelessly copied. I think I copied IBM's website at the time. It was like in the mid-90s, 1997. And so it was just HTML graphics and GIFs and JPEGs. And so I didn't know anything about design. So I was like, why don't I just copy what's good out there, or what I thought looked good? So I just started to do that. I looked at, I went through the process of like browsing websites that I liked, seeing like, oh, why did I like it? And like, oh, this has just the right level of content and navigation. And then I did that. So then from there, I started designing websites for other companies, small companies like a law firm, veterinary hospitals, and a bunch of other different random stuff for even for just high school club or college groups and stuff like that. And then I got like internships to do that kind of stuff for paid work, which is great. And that's how I learned. I always kind of looked at, what others were doing, and then use that as inspiration to adapt to my own work.
I think that what you just said was really interesting, what others were doing. And I think that also ties back to UX being basically a way of interacting with the zeitgeist. It's like, how is the rest of the world, or a majority of the rest of the world, looking at this? What do people intuitively understand? But that depends on what they've been exposed to, and that is so. And this is constantly shaping and reshaping. You're creating something to interact with a changing organism, which is a certain way of understanding things.
It's almost like fashion. I think of UX from like fashion, because right now bell bottoms are in again in the US. So my daughter's like, oh, I want bell bottoms. And like, a year ago, you would be like, oh, those are horrible. They're so old. And now they're in again. And so you have to kind of like stay up to the time. Today it's flat. Maybe let's say 10 years ago, it was all about beveled corners. And, that Apple started doing those candy, shiny little icons right back then. And that was really cool because all the apps had that. But now it's changed to the Google Material Flat, and who knows, in like 10 years, it'll be something different. And so in the hamburger menu and all these aspects about what we assume, and we start to assume that people understand the design language, because more and more do, become kind of ingrained in knowing that you have to design things to people's understanding of norms. It's really interesting if you look at Google Meet, which we're on right now, Kristof. The hang up button is a old school telephone. My daughter, who was born when there was no such thing as telephone, would be like, why is that weird arc with like a curved dumbbell meaning
Yeah.
phone, right? It's like it's people have like institutionally understood that red and phone and a circle means hang up, and like Apple has created that language in the iPhone, and someone else probably did it, and then that now has become a orchestrated design language that's now been published broadly. So it's interesting how design is like this kind of language, universal language that gets copied and replicated to become more of a cultural norm.
And the same is the case also for APIs, I think. So basically, you are creating a constraint that is limiting what people can do or what are ways to do something.
Yeah.
Like there's certain good and there's good and there's bad UX. And at the same time, it's increasing the leverage that those patterns hold. You can innovate faster because you've standardized certain pieces.
Yeah. It's the power of the voice in that case, right? You ever did that, like that pet shop example with REST? Do you guys ever do that?
Oh, we have it on our demo portal. So it's so basically, that's one example. It's a meme by now, and everybody, if you're a developer, you've dealt with REST APIs. You know about the pet shop example.
Yeah, and that's like, what is that? That's like the red phone hang up, because it's like everybody knows it, and so that's perpetuated a way of approach, to these things. Yeah. And sometimes we would we do these API REST best practices, and we put up like, here's how Facebook does versioning, here's how LinkedIn does versioning, here's how Microsoft or Google does LinkedIn. And so you see like there's various different executions of it, but they're very similar, And so that's a design standard. Like, is it v1.0, v1.000.0, is v1 at the end, or is it at the beginning, or in the middle of the phrases? So it's like, you start to see that, like, oh, there's definitely trends and there's definitely general patterns of understanding. And so I think that's shaping in the same way people's expectations of design and understandings of behavior, right? Like, next time you pick up an API, you're like, oh, there's no version in this URL. This is not intuitive. Like, I don't know what version I'm gonna have to look in the header for that kind of stuff. I think it's changing. Anytime you're doing this session with a customer or the colleague, you're influencing their sense of UX, right?
Well, when we started doing dev portals, there was very little business documentation, and now it's kind of like a given. Like, you need to have business. You have to think about the business persona. Do you have certain things that you were like early on advising customers on, and that you now see like, oh, now this has become kind of like the big trend?
I mean, we tried to, I think we were going through a lot of these general best practices, and I think it's catching up. It's like documentation is at different levels, right? So making connections to the audience by making it easier to consume in the beginning, right? So shorter phrases, what's the purpose and value of these APIs, putting the version number there, making it easy to find. And then when you get down to the specs level, giving more details, right? Like the version history, particular error codes and handling, better documentation. And I think even the list view of how do developers incorporate documentation. I was with a customer, and if you observe developers, a lot of them will have two screens, right? They'll have laptop, they'll have another screen. And a lot of developers will flip their screens portrait mode. They won't go landscape because code is long. It's not wide,
Yeah.
So that means developers will have code on one screen and then documentation on another screen. So if they put it on the wide screen, it's better to have multi-column so they can see example code, copy and paste. So you look at the way developers do work and how you should adapt your documentation for ease of copy and paste, ease of reference, and not just around the completeness of stuff. Completeness, sure, but how can you make it easy for developers to, reference back and forth on a split screen, taking that into account. So I think there's, I see more and more, and if you look at all these websites, I think a lot of them kind of got into the idea of split screen, even on the view pane, because you want to execute, right, the sample code, and then you want to see the reference at the same time, because who wants to execute the sample code and then like scroll 3 pages up for the reference documentation? Like that's a pain. I can do that on my split screen monitor, so I should expect the same sort of ease of experience when I look at specifications. So I think that's just like an example that I see.
Like, do you see maybe another trend that I've been wondering about is that I sometimes still see organizations where they're not using API management per se. Like one organization we started talking with now, like basically it's homebrew API management.
Yeah.
Can you give like a short pitch for like, why is that a bad idea?
I think there's several reasons that it was a good idea then, and it's probably a bad idea now. Most times homegrown things come out of very specific needs. Back then, just needed a gateway. I need to publish, somebody need to call. And usually with those very specific needs, you don't want to buy, a Cadillac when all you need was a bicycle, right? And so what happens with most of these homegrowns is over time, you need to end up buying, another bicycle. Then you're bolting on, a little engine to the bicycle. And after a while, it starts looking like a Frankenstein because what was a need became a need for other people. Homegrown systems are, one, they're fragile because nobody wants to change it because there's many hands that have touched it. The other thing is, as needs grow, API security becomes more and more of an issue. So whether it's internal, external, especially for external, how many different endpoints do you have externalized to the world, right? Like there's more and more hacks, there's more and more different companies people who are just trying to do nefarious things by poking at different vulnerabilities at a company. And those things need to be properly managed. And so you think about the developer 5 years ago who started an API gateway for a specific need. Now, all of a sudden, that person no longer exists. And then someone who backfilled him is now responsible for the security of the APIs that were built on a homegrown system. It becomes a big burden and a big risk for the company. And not only that, it becomes something unsustainable because, would you rather have one person who's doing it as their part-time job, or do you want to buy an appliance that basically there's hundreds of people supporting that product over time?
Yeah.
It's the same reason why we don't build our own TVs or we don't have our own microwaves or refrigerators or our own cars, because manufacturing and appliances have gone to the point where they are stable. They're much better supported. They meet 95, 98% of the average use cases out there and mitigate the risk. And so that's one side. The other side is, I'm sure you've seen it, Kristof. It's like hiring good people is like really challenging. Hiring good developers is worth more than that developer that you're paying them. And so would you rather your developer be building something that you could be buying and then putting that developer on something that can't be bought, that is proprietary, that is your true IP? And that's, I think, what companies are rationalizing is, they have developers who have been so many years focused on older technology, and now they need to upskill them and decide how to do and how to bring these developers away from the stuff that no longer needs to be homebuilt or maintained. And I think there's a workforce and there's an opportunity for companies to focus that talent on something that's much more core to their company. I think that's the other value. Is what's the value of your talent and their time worth?
I've seen some organizations then on the outside use API management, but then on the inside they're like, no, here, But I think then the risk is, or the lost opportunity you have, is that it's harder to externalize one of those internal APIs. Yeah. I think. And then it basically becomes like a product job where you have to like productize something that was on the inside before it can be brought outside.
Yeah. And that depends on how streamlined things are. How vertically integrated do you want your API software development lifecycle to be? Back to front office and external becomes. Maybe it's a differentiator for some companies, and sometimes like, I can deal with a broken pipeline. I don't need to. I don't need to be the best in that. And that's, I think, depends on the company they benefit from.
Like I've seen it as like on the inside, it's a bunch of microservices, but then they have a translation layer to the outside. That's what I've seen a few times.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes still need to make the case for APIs at the organizations you come? Or like people are kind of like, okay, we all know we need APIs. How does that normally work? Because you have that role, right? Where you go in an organization, there's some people that have seen the lights, but they need to convince the CEO. How does that work?
Usually it's not the case about APIs. I think less and less it's about the value of APIs. It's more about, it's either, I'm trying to like think about it. It's either APIs and how they're used to drive the business. Sometimes you have to make the connection, right? Especially when it comes to larger purchases. If it's, I don't know, $50,000, then it's usually there's a signing limit. There's a sign-off approval, budget approval limit at a company, right? And anything over $100,000, especially if it's like millions or more, is going to require some business case investment from companies. There's CFO review. There's like, what's the return? What does it actually drive? And in those cases, it's really important to tie APIs to sales. And that's not easy if you're on the IT side and you're just getting requirements. Working with our customers to build that case is an important part of kind of helping enable them, right? Because that's like the first step in this transformation in many ways, is like, how can we tie it?
And then that brings it all back to where we started, is like the bright spots and how do you get started with an API program. And I guess it is true that finding a way to make the value explicit and a couple of those stories, that is essential to get buy-in and to get a program off the ground.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, you have the bright spots got to tie to what's meaningful to the business.
Yeah. It feels to me that we are learning how does like things like culture and language and these enabling things that help us to, or UX or API programs. These are all things that enable us to be more effective. Yeah. And there's this thin boundary between becoming more effective and more efficient and losing adaptivity and finding like that right path between those two.
There's a lot there that you kind of touched on. It's a lot more than APIs. It's like more than meets the eye. It's like a transformer. There's a lot of layers to understand the impact of what you can do with APIs, which is why I love business.
It's fascinating times and a fascinating industry. Thank you very much for your time. I'm very much looking forward to like some beers once this whole thing blows over.
Podcast and beer. That would be the best. In the backyard, looking at some wildlife.
For sure.
Gardens.
Some lotuses. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ray. It was a pleasure again.
Pleasure's mine too. Thanks, Kristof.
It's our hope that you were encouraged by today's story and picked up some insights that will help you navigate your digital transformation and make your API program more successful. If you have questions or feedback on the podcast, we invite you to email us at info@prenovix.com. Thanks for listening.